This is Talking Hardcore, the podcast for people who love hardcore history.
You study history because it allows us to understand the present and prepare for the future.
I'm not trolling.
And I love it.
I'm
I'm
just
here for
pointing out where they're wrong.
The Talking Hardcore podcast is presented by Ace Industrial Solutions. Are you in need of skilled trade professionals for your next project? Look no further.
This is a special edition of Talking Hardcore. We are on the road. This is our first ever road trip for the Talking Hardcore podcast. We are in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Going to see Dan Carlin at the Union Event Center.
Yep, we're pumped. He's going to talk tonight, and so we thought we'd jump on here for a couple of minutes to talk just a little bit beforehand, and then when we get back afterwards tonight, we'll come on and talk about what it was, and then we'll upload this hopefully tonight. So. Yep. You guys should be listening to this maybe either late the same day or the next day after we saw the show.
Well, that's what's funny. He's not airing any of this.
Right. Well, it makes sense, though. I mean, it's a live event, right?
Yeah.
And
still.
A lot of times they don't like to air that because that's what makes it fun. If he airs them, then it kind of kills some of the incentive to go see him. But we'll see. You know, if we get a chance to ask questions or anything like that, we'll let you guys know. All right, we'll be back here in a few minutes.
Yeah, we look forward to seeing Dan Carlin, and hopefully it's a great show.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll be. Okay, talk to you guys soon. And we're back. We just got back from watching Dan Carlin live in Salt Lake City. You heard us talking a little bit beforehand, and now here we're back to talk about the show.
It was a very good show.
Scott,
Very good.
I agree with you. First, we want to throw a big thank you to Dan for putting on the show. What a great job he did. I've never heard anybody talk who you literally couldn't give him a bad question.
And Professor Steve
Right.
Wright?
Yeah.
You sure?
No, but I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
I took a note of it.
All right.
I'm going to email and try to get him on the podcast.
That sounds cool.
Yeah. The University of Iowa.
Yep, from the University of
Right.
Iowa.
He's a historian, and he was there helping host the show. But I mean, I've never met anybody like Dan who you can't ask him a question that he can't answer well.
Yeah, he answered some yeah, but one in particular, but he answered questions very well.
A lot of good questions too.
Yeah.
But I mean, he has a good, well, we'll get into that. The other thank you we want to say is to our presenting sponsor, Ace Industrial Solutions. Thanks for sending us out here, letting us come to the show.
Hotel room.
Everything. Ace,
it was a good time.
Ace is great. If you guys want to help support the podcast, go check out Ace Industrial Solutions. There's a link in the description to their Facebook page, and their website's almost refreshed, so that'll go live, and then we'll have a link to that as well. They've got all your solutions for any of your industry
needs.
They need to change their tagline and say, "We've got solutions for your industry."
That's a good one.
Yeah, I'm good at taglines.
We'll have to tell him.
Yeah, I'll tell Ace. He's a good guy.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, Ace. I like Ace. Anyway, thanks again, Ace. All right, now let's get our thoughts on the show. Okay, Scott, first, what are your thoughts?
I thought the show was great. Raised a couple questions. There was a Q&A section of the show. Unfortunately, I was not picked to ask my questions to Dan. But altogether, I thought it was great. It was almost like a podcast part for Dan, and then the Q&A was almost like a questioning of like a Q&A section of a podcast.
Right.
It's kind of like our interview.
Well, it is interesting because a lot of the subjects we covered in our interview came up again.
Yep.
But I think that's the nature of Dan Carlin and his audience, and what interests him, what he ends up talking about.
And what interests the audience. We all have similar questions.
Like he said, it self-selects.
Yep.
Right? He's self-selected his audience to like the same subjects as him. Right?
Yep.
And that's fun because then you're around almost probably 800 people tonight. 800 people came out to watch to listen and watch a guy who's a history enthusiast talk about the shit that he loves.
But see, you know what?
That's awesome.
And here's my question. How many professors read as many books? History professors read as many books as Dan has on specific topics. I know Dan is kind of all over the place with the topics he enjoys, but that's what he does. He does the topics he enjoys. So he even said tonight, I wouldn't do a Civil War podcast because I don't know enough about it and I haven't read enough about it.
Right.
So,
But what he said, to
Go
get
ahead.
to what your point is, okay, you're going to say he's as well learned as any historian out there. And I don't think there's an argument that he's not. But what he says is what qualifies him differently, and he said this tonight, what makes him not a historian is because historians are there digging and searching to find the actual truth of what happened.
yeah,
So he's more of a popular historian. He's
Sure.
more of a Churchill or Orwell.
sure.
Okay.
But it doesn't make it any less interesting
And it's
or
history, though,
yeah.
right? He's more of a history professor. The teaching of history, he's a history teacher. Probably the most successful history teacher in the world, and probably in world history. Maybe Herodotus, right? Like that's it, right? Like those are the guys that you can put up there with Dan Carlin and Herodotus is just because he's been around a lot longer,
Yeah.
right? But like Dan Carlin in 2,000 years is probably going to be known more than Herodotus.
Possibly. Dan Carlin mentions Herodotus a lot, so
True.
it
So it kind
would-
of builds on itself. That's
Yeah.
a good point. But I mean, think about it.
his
right?
whole,
Like,
we all stand on the shoulders of giants.
Right, but then you hear like what Matt, Matt says this in our one podcast with him is, about Ghosts of the Ostfront. He's like, that's an oral history that I think should be preserved.
Sure.
And luckily it will, but I mean, that's what all of the episodes are. They're an oral history in the long tradition of human oral history.
Yep.
And he is awesome at it.
Yeah. Complete professional. Like I just
God, it's so buttoned up, right? Like he just answers the question. Even if you don't know what question you're asking, he knows what question you're asking.
or
and he
trying
knows-
to ask, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And he knows how to answer it.
Yep.
And that's so cool.
But and then he also did bring up possibly somebody asked about bringing back common sense, which he goes, it's not like the band broke up, all right? We're it's we kind of just tabled the issue. We're just kind of on hiatus because
Yeah.
it caught too much flack,
Well,
because he was trying to be centrist on everything, and that's okay.
Well, he's trying to see both sides, and that's what you need. But I never really got into common sense, and part of that is because I like hardcore history so much that I don't want to involve politics more than it is already.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to. Like it's nice that this is a respite, and it helps. Hardcore history episodes really have shaped the way I think about everything that leads up to the modern politics, and it's helped give me a bigger perspective on the politics of the day. So the way I think about politics now is 100% influenced by the politic or by listening to hardcore history. But I like that his voice, for me, only comes from that area, and I don't get any of the modern politics messed up with it.
Yeah.
And that's just me personally. And I know I'm sure if I started listening to it, I would love it, right? Because
Sure.
he's good.
Yeah.
He's just good at it.
Well, and I wanted to listen to Common Sense. I just didn't. I never.
You don't want to go back and listen to the old stuff.
Well, I'd still want to listen to
Well,
it.
you
I just
Yes,
never.
there's too much shit to listen to and everything.
Yeah.
But it's like, yeah, so I'm it doesn't bother me that he doesn't do it. Because people should be able to listen to hardcore history and come away with an idea of how you should be in modern politics.
Maybe.
When you listen to history and you listen to Dan and you see that it's so much more complicated than what you think, and there's so much more going on.
There's too many nuances.
There's so much more nuance
Yeah.
and context,
Sure.
right? Context. That's
that's-
important. And when you take, what do politicians do but strip out the nuance and the context
Yeah.
so they can drop it into like a one-word thing? That's what they do. And we should all stop listening to that.
Well, I mean, it's. I think it would be. It's up to each individual to think about where they stand on each issue and then what the arguments are from each side.
Right.
And then figure out what they think the best solution is to that.
As long
that
as they're
problem.
actually putting thought into it, that's all.
Well,
that
that's
matters.
but that's
Right.
I feel like most people,
They pick a side and then just stick with that.
or they just hear the same talking points over and over and over again from their chosen news source,
Right.
and that's all they think.
Right.
You know, it's,
Okay, but let's get back to the show tonight. What was your favorite part?
Um,
Well, let me ask you more questions. Did you like the way that the other host, Stephen Wright, the doctor, I think, the way he steered the ship?
I think he did a pretty good job. I mean, I think it could have been a little bit better, but I think he did a good job.
I thought he did it well. I mean, it's not an easy
No,
task
of course not.
because Dan takes ideas and just spins them all over the place and talks for 5 minutes with a question, right?
and the
Which
other-
is great. But
and the other problem is it's Dan's show. You know what I mean?
right.
And it's difficult to
To highlight that,
yeah.
while also presenting some ideas and stuff. But I thought he raised a couple good points.
I did. A good point and a little bit of a curiosity for me, but
One of the best points he raised, well, no, I don't know if we can even get into that stuff. Well, I guess we could. So the question came up about hard times and silk slippers and wooden shoes and silk slippers and hard times, right?
yeah.
And, you know, Dan was talking about how could we beat our grandparents and also do we want to live in that world? And then he raised a great point. He's like, also hard men can make the times harder.
Yeah.
And that's true. And his example was great
With Japan.
with Japan. His example was if the Japanese weren't so hard, weren't so tough, if they weren't so tough, they wouldn't have attacked Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
Okay? They wouldn't have had to get atom bombed,
Yeah.
right? And so I thought that was a great point. And then Dan raised the point about how modern weapons kind of let us negate some of that toughness. And I thought about that a lot. And he's like, so, you know, his example was the Marines that were able to mow down Japanese because they had machine guns, or the drones that can do all that damage from somebody flying it from Kansas City.
Yeah.
So you don't have to be tough enough to stab your opponent
With a sword.
with a sword. And I thought about that, but what you do need is a society, and civilians who are tough enough to have this war.
yeah.
And that's the one thing that seems like that's the one thing that could go away in the whole hard times make hard men thing, right? Is that you need the tough men, because if you don't have a perception of being tough, then you end up getting taken advantage of. You could end up in a war
Yeah.
if you don't have that ability, that where people are afraid to attack.
Yeah.
That could lead to war.
But you have to have tough men to fight the war. You have to. I mean, you can't.
Well, no, with modern technology, not as much. It's not that you don't, but it's a lot less.
You're still going to have troops on the ground. You're still going to have.
Sure, but I mean, look at the difference, what you can do with drones now.
Sure.
I mean, he's right. I heard about that Wall Street Journal article too. Like what they're doing with drones in Ukraine is crazy.
Yeah. Well,
And Russia too. They're doing shit like that. That's nuts.
Do you know how I read this? I read an article similar, but this was months ago.
No, you were telling me about this.
Do you know how the Ukrainians were able to circumvent Russian radar
Yes,
with drones?
only because you told me.
Yeah. They made them out of cardboard.
Oh no, that's not what I heard.
They made them out of cardboard or wood. I think it was cardboard.
That's wild.
They have cardboard drones that you cannot detect by radar because they're fucking cardboard.
That's hilarious. You know what else I heard was interesting? Is that there was the Russians figured out that Ukrainians had a technology to jam the drones
Okay.
from like up to a mile,
Yeah.
or some amount of feet. So they realized that they could just have the drones hardwired, literally flying
With a wire.
with a wire hanging back,
Yeah.
like a little thin fiber optic cable. and then they can't be blocked.
Yeah.
They can't be jammed,
So it's funny
which
because
is fascinating.
because Dan brought up, the drone issue, and like, you have your $13 billion aircraft carrier,
Mm-hmm.
and you could take whatever 1,000 drones to
Right.
attack an aircraft carrier. Well,
Right.
yes and no, yes and no, and
Right.
and you know what? If you go by the World War II tactics, enough planes will always get through,
Mm-hmm.
but to sink an aircraft carrier. We couldn't even sink our aircraft carrier. Like, we tried to scuttle our own ships at times, like our battleships,
Yeah.
and like it
But,
would
like,
take many more. Like, the thing just wouldn't go down.
I don't think that unless you're doing like a tactical nuke in a drone, I don't think you're going to be able to sink an aircraft carrier with one drone. Right?
But then aircraft carriers don't
Right.
travel alone either.
Right.
It's a battle group.
but then again, it's 14 billion versus a couple million.
That,
Have you ever watched those YouTube videos of the drones, what they do with the AI drone controlled computer software?
No.
How, like, so for the last Olympics, the Chinese, for that Olympics, they put on this crazy dragon drone
Oh
thing.
yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's all pre-programmed, right?
Yeah.
But with AI, it wouldn't have to be. So you think about that, right? And so the defense is going to have to be that too. So if you, and that's one of the things Dan was talking about, is like, what do you do with an AI drone swarm? Swarm.
Well, so it's not that simple. It's not that difficult. And what you do with an AI drone swarm is you just stay out of reach of the AI drone swarm.
But yeah, but these drones are getting longer and longer. And then
You
what
can
if you
fire
don't-
missiles a lot
but you
further
could-
than a drone can
But
fly.
you can fire drones from really far too.
You can
I mean,
fire
you can-
missiles than
Yeah, but
drone
what if,
than further than
what if
drones
you
can fly.
launch a little? Well, anyway, it's still something that is rapidly evolving and changing, and it's changing so fast, and it's weird because military usually until what 1900s didn't change that fast,
Sure.
and now it's going so fast that there's whole weapon systems that probably didn't get put into place that are out of date.
Yeah, but it's still the same theology, the same method of the overwhelming force by air. Okay, it's the same method.
Right.
That's why we have aircraft carriers, so you can have overwhelming force by air. But so and if you launch enough planes, you're going to say it sooner or later. A number of them are going to get through. They always get through. That's
Right.
but it's
Right.
different tactics.
Okay.
But then with your fiber optic cable, what I mean,
And then you invent a drone that could just run and snip it with the little scissors on the
or
front. You know?
or you have a. I mean, it only works for it can't work for very far.
Right, it was like a mile, but it was. They were able to do it so they could get through the jamming.
Okay.
Okay, but then, listen, there's always going to be a battle.
But that's Ukraine's jamming capabilities, not the United States' jamming capabilities.
I agree. But I'm saying it's always developing and changing, right? It's always developing and changing, and it's one side, the offense progresses, then the defense has to catch up, and
Yeah.
shit like that, right? That's just the way it works.
Sure.
So, but it might be progressing away from our advantage.
Or-
Because our big advantage militarily was money,
Or
right?
you backtrack where that signal's coming from and launch a fucking missile down its throat.
Right, but what if they fly a drone into your missile and detonate it?
You've got a lot more missiles.
Well, they got a lot more drones because they're cheaper than missiles.
Yeah. But,
So that's the problem, right? Whether that's solvable or not, listen, we don't even know enough to know all the problems,
sure.
right? So let's get back to the show.
That's what think tanks are for.
Yeah, but let's get back to the show. Okay, so that I thought okay, so what was your favorite part? You answered that. Well, what do you want to talk about the show?
Well, I had questions. I didn't get that. They had the Q&A section. I raised my hand the entire time.
Shout out.
Shout out to. Oh. What?
Who are you going to shout out?
Shout out to who?
From the Discord channel.
Oh, Sunflower.
Shout out to Sunflower.
For being there at the same time.
She got to ask a question. It was a good question.
Yep.
It was very interesting.
Tried to get Dan to move, have
more
shows in
tour
Texas,
dates.
more tour dates in Texas.
Honestly, based on the turnout that he got today, and he said, when I've talked with him via email, and he said that if the turnout was good, they were going to do more, and he said that on our show too. Well, if Based on the turnout on the last shows, and those were the ones that he was most worried about,
Yep.
I think you're going to see him doing more tours.
Well, I think LA sold out, right?
No, it didn't until like that day, I think.
Well, it's still sold out.
I don't know if it like officially was sold out like our
Gotcha.
show. Was that officially sold out? I don't know, but it was really full.
Yeah.
There was probably 800 people there, right?
I think there might have been maybe that whole venue could have held 1,000.
Right, and so it was probably even more than that then. If that venue could hold 1,000, there was probably 900 there.
Yeah.
Right,
There
that's
weren't
pretty,
too many empty seats.
That's pretty impressive, really.
right.
But I mean, based on that, I'm thinking he's going to do more shows
I hope so.
because the next two were already pre-sold out anyway,
Yep.
right?
Well, New York is, I think, isn't New York
It's in
sold out?
early April. That was sold out, and Portland is sold out,
Gotcha.
right? So those ones were already sold out. These were the ones you were worried about, and they did good.
Yep. It was
So-
a good time.
and he seemed to enjoy it too.
And he's very humble. He's
God,
very
man,
humble.
so humble.
I mean,
Every time you, yeah, he is exactly who you'd think he'd be.
yep.
So you hear the podcast and you're like, okay, I wonder what he's like. And then we got to talk to him and you're like, man, he's just like, even before we were recording.
Yep.
Okay, even before we were recording, or even in emails, he's just like you would hope he is. And he's there tonight, he's the same. He's just consistently that guy who is a genuinely good, interesting person who's intrigued by things and shares that passion, and that's what inspires the audience. Because his enthusiasm inspires us to be curious based from his curiosity.
Yep. Well, and the way he presents facts and data, and like he does he does the work, he does the background work, and
And none of that would matter if he wasn't also good at telling the story.
yep, great storyteller.
Right? That's what matters. Like, you can do all the work in the world, but if you don't know how to tell the story, then it doesn't do you any good.
And his analogies are spot on.
Yeah. Well, I think he's had a lot of practice with that too.
Yeah, I mean, but they're spot on. I mean, that's they're applicable.
Sure. But yeah, man,
It was a good time.
shout out to Dan Carlin. Thanks for doing that. It was awesome.
All right, so the two questions I didn't get to ask. Let's
Yeah.
just do one of them.
Fuck yeah, let's go.
So the question was, here, hold on, let me just pull up my notes here.
I made notes also for t-shirt ideas while we were there.
All right, the first question was, were you able to find any facts or evidence a feigned flight was used in World War I? And my thoughts, I thought about this because we asked Dan.
Because that was something we brought up on our show.
Yep, something we did.
talked to him.
We did the interview on, and I thought about it, and I was like, they probably, like generals or commanders at the time, probably would not have done that because they would have looked at it as cowardly. Because as Dan mentions, World War I, World War II, we're punchers. In the West, we're punchers. We're not boxers. So I don't think, like, even if you didn't get out of the trench and go charge, you are a coward. You know what I mean? So I think they would have just looked at that as cowardice, and then they wouldn't even have thought of they might have thought of using the tactic, but I think they would have just disregarded it or dismissed it.
No.
You don't
I
think
don't
so?
think so.
I do.
I don't think so.
You have to remember,
I just don't think the technology let it work.
George, it wouldn't be difficult.
You say that, but they had trenches and they had artillery that could fire miles
I gotcha.
stationed back. Like I just think it wouldn't have worked.
I think it would have worked.
Yeah, it's really tricky.
I mean,
to pull.
they
They say all the time like how hard it is to pull that off. When it was just horses.
You had to be good actors.
Well, you had to be good actors, one, but you also had to have your people aware enough during all the fighting to not let it be a real rout.
Yeah.
Because if it's a real rout, if your fake route turns into a real route,
Yeah, but
then you get routed.
But I'm not looking at it as a route. I think you're
no.
misunderstanding.
No,
what I
no,
mean
the
by
feigned flight. The feigned flight.
I think you're misunderstanding
Well, I think
what
then you're
my
not-
definition would be.
Well, then, but there is a definition.
Okay, so in
So
World War-
your
here's-
definition
no.
has to match up with the definition.
In my mind, here's how it
Okay.
would work. You do your creeping barrage. Your guys are getting shot at. Yes, some guys are actually getting shot.
Yeah.
Other guys are acting like they get shot and then just lay down in trench holes or just lay down on the ground.
Yeah, but you're talking about not a feigned flight then.
Hold on. It's almost like a pincer movement in the middle of no man's land. But it would be a feigned flight.
Right.
Because guys are going down, and then when the enemy goes to counterattack, they get closer to your lines, okay, and you can shoot,
Right.
but your guys are laying on the ground pretending to be dead or wounded, and then as the first or the counterattack comes by or passes them, then they get up and start shooting the guys right behind, like the counterattack.
I think that stuff happened. And I think what they would do to make sure that after the first time it happened is they start shooting those guys in the head.
All it would need to do is work once.
But I think
And what are you going to do? Stop and shoot the guy on the ground while you're getting shot at? While
As
you're
you-
trying to cross no man's land?
yeah, I think they probably just would start having the machine gunners hit all the bodies.
Not if you're in a
the guys that were at the trenches were also shooting. No man's land was no man's land because they had machine guns pointed at it.
Yeah.
And they were blasting. So they would probably just hit the guys on the ground too to make sure.
not
And
if
for all
they're
we know-
not if they're in artillery holes from your creeping barrage.
Yeah. No,
You see what I'm saying? Like they'd have perfect cover.
Scott,
all it would have to do is work once.
I don't think it would work.
All it had to do is work once.
I think,
all it had to do.
I think you had situations where shit like that would happen, but I don't think you could practice that, and I don't think you could train that, and I don't think you could order that.
Like I said,
Like, okay, because those trenches were so dug in, like you're not going to take that risk to back up because hopefully enough of your guys survive that and just pretended to be dead that you could get the enemy from behind.
or do you think that the Germans were kind of doing a feigned flight with their rubber band technique? So yeah, you might take the first trench, but then get into the second trench is harder, and then get into the third trench is even
Right.
harder, and then finally it snaps back like a rubber band, and you get your first trench back after killing a bunch of people.
Right. And that's very similar.
I
Right?
mean,
See, that's why I'm saying, like,
Defense in depth, I think is what it was called.
no, that's World War II.
No, it was World War. I
The
think
defense in depth was the defense to the German Blitzkrieg. Right. It was so they moved so fast and would surround you, so you had to be miles and hundreds of miles deep in your defense so that the Blitzkrieg couldn't get around.
I think that worked on World War One too.
No, World War One they were dug in.
Well, that's why they had defense in depth.
It
though.
wasn't defense and
I'm
we'll
pretty
look
sure.
it up.
We'll look it
doesn't-
up.
It doesn't matter.
Anybody in the comments,
All
if
right,
you're
second
reading
question.
this, wait a minute. Anybody in
I
the
know
comments,
they're all gonna know.
If you're reading this-
Matt will be like, he'll know the answer to this already too.
So what if he says I'm right?
That's then great. You don't think it's possible that I know I'm wrong all the time?
All right. So anyway, the second question
that you wanted to ask.
Dan brought up at the very beginning of the talk today. What? So he was thinking about, he was watching an Avengers movie, and before the advertisements for the new movies even came out, he saw 130 deaths. That maybe
Just
that
in
was,
the previews.
just in the previews. Okay.
Yeah.
So I had a question that just rang to me because Stephen Wright, is it Stephen Wright? Mm-hmm. Okay, brought up a good point, and he was saying, students in his classes have sensitivities. They're sensitive to
Trigger warnings.
He called them trigger warnings, but it's like is slavery or they just have a number of sensitive
You can't
topics.
talk about hard subjects
Yeah.
because people are triggered.
So my question is, how is it that modern day young adults or college age students, probably having seen most of the same movies and maybe 130 simulated deaths and 4 minutes of previews,
That's a great thought.
how are they more sensitive and where they can't talk about specific topics today? And is this a sign of wooden shoes and silk slippers coming down? Or is this and they brought up rhymes, Dan Carlin brought up rhymes of
Right.
history. Is this like a rhyme from the 70s where people were more sensitive to certain topics?
It's not either one of those things, in my opinion. It is simply that we've coddled a whole generation. Worse. Well, so I guess, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say what I said then, because it could easily be the hard times, hard men thing. Okay. But Abigail Schreier has a new book out talking about how there was a rush to take kids to therapy. You go back to Calling of the American Mind in 2018. You look at all these things that we've done to make these kids emotionally fragile.
Yeah.
Okay? We've made them emotionally fragile. That's why you have a trigger warning. So the reason that there's trigger warnings and the reason you can't talk about hot stuff, because you didn't do it. So when that comes up, a university's supposed to tell them, get your ass back in class and listen to this shit, because if you can't hear it, you need to hear it.
Yeah.
That's when you better sit down and fucking listen, because that's when you need to hear it.
Well, and I don't understand how you're. I mean, I don't get it. And or you could say that though, George. But these same kids are playing violent video games that were way more graphic.
It's not the same kids.
Well, it is.
That's the thing, is we're lumping this whole generation in. Well, the kids in school that need trigger warnings are the same kids that play Call of Duty, but maybe not. Maybe the Call of Duty kids aren't in the ones in college should need trigger warnings. Maybe that's two different sets.
Maybe.
I don't assume
There's
that they're
no
all the same
data.
because they're the same generation. You're right.
But
Hopefully somebody's studying this shit.
But if they've watched violent movies and violent video games, horror movies, I mean, you can't tell me you have a whole generation of kids or 18-year-olds that have never seen a horror movie and all kinds of blood and gore and shit.
But the ones that watch horror movies aren't the ones that get trigger warnings.
You don't know that.
I do. I'm just saying that doesn't make sense.
It does.
It doesn't. The point is, a lot of people don't like horror movies.
Sure.
Okay? And they're not into the gore and stuff. And those are the people now that don't even want to hear that it was possible for any of that stuff to be real.
Or do you think, this is the other topic, I couldn't have had a chain question like this to Dan or Steve.
Sure.
But I wanted to ask, do you think it's because kids stopped interacting with each other socially outdoors
Coddling the
without
American mind.
parental supervision for the most part like we had? So if you had one kid that was being a jerk and then you got in a fist fight with that kid, you know, the other kids would either just watch and be like, well, whatever.
Right.
And then that would be the end of the fight.
Sure.
Like, it's not like you went to the hospital afterwards.
Well,
it was more like it was a fist fight. One guy was on the ground, walk away, it's over.
Jonathan Haidt talked about that in Coddling the American Mind, right? And the idea is independent play. Kids have to learn to figure stuff out without an adult to solve their problems.
Yeah.
But that's a different thing than what you're talking about. What you're talking about is kids need to learn to solve their problems and also maybe get punched once in a while, which is true. But then there's people who are so sensitive. And that's because, and that's more about Abigail Schreier's new book, is like, because it's all about your feelings.
Well, it's not.
Okay, no, but that's how these kids are being raised.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel? How does that make you feel? Well, you know what it turns out? That's not the right question. You
Yeah.
should never, not never, but don't focus on asking your kids, how does that make you feel? Don't focus on that at all. Talk to your kids about how you can fix the situation.
Well, see, what's funny, George, is that's something that I brought up to my sister posted this on Facebook one time.
Okay.
I know, hold on, because she's going to be a therapist. But but as a kid that had therapy at a young age, my therapist would ask that question non-stop. And I hated him for it because it was like a cop-out or almost him not doing his job, because instead of him telling me what he thought a situation turned out or panned out to be, it was, well, how did that make you feel? Well, how do you think, Jimmy pushing me down,
Right.
At the playground made me feel? I was upset.
Right.
Okay? Of course I wanted to beat
Let's
up
look
Jim.
at why you're upset.
Yeah.
Right, no, fuck you.
What do you
Of course
mean, why was I upset? It's like,
Right, but and that's again, that's why therapy's bad if you're not actually really sick.
yeah.
Okay, like if you have real issues that you need therapy for, it's great. But that's what Abigail Schreier talked about in her new book. Okay, is literally you're sending kids to therapists. There's all these therapists, and now there's no way to make sure that they're actually good at their effing job.
Yeah.
And you're sending healthy kids to therapy instead of just letting them deal with their emotions the way normal kids would. You're thinking, well, we'll send them to therapy.
You can't say normal. You'd say historically how we had kids
what
deal
I'm saying.
with their feelings.
I meant to say normally kids would.
Yeah. There
Okay.
you go.
The way normally kids would handle things, okay? Instead now we're pushing this whole new idea, like we can fix the way we raise kids, and that's just gonna work.
Well,
But let's get back to,
Well, wait a minute. We're
Okay.
social animals. Let's just expand on that. We're social animals.
Right.
And how do we learn? By socially interacting with each other.
right.
Now, maybe that got a little out of hand before an adult got involved.
Sometimes.
And maybe it didn't get out of hand. Maybe
Right.
that was what we needed.
But then the problem is now it's harder to get back to that because once you've taken that away, it's hard to get back to it without it escalating beyond reasonable situations, right? What about the whole school shooting things? Like, part of the reason that happens is because there's not enough bullying.
Yeah, but how do you know that's because those kids are getting too much therapy?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Or SSRIs, or psychotics, or they didn't get bullied the right way, or
Well, I mean,
there is a right way to have bullying, not hazing and not overly extensive. But men need bullying.
you know what?
That's how we relate to each other. That's how you keep a guy from being an egotistical maniac.
Sometimes.
Okay, like if a good-looking guy who's the quarterback of the football team never gets teased about something, he's going to end up being a giant douchebag.
Oh, for sure.
Right? And he might anyway, but he has a better chance of not if he gets made fun of a little bit about something. All right? And so now you got generations of kids. I shouldn't say that because then they have online bullying, but it's mostly in girls. And it's really boys who need the bullying. It's mostly boys who need that.
Well, girls.
Because it's a different way that they bully. And it can be worse because it's on digitally so that it doesn't stop.
Yeah, but that's another thing you got to teach kids then.
Yeah, get the fuck off the internet and go outside.
Yeah, well, somebody might say something to me like, okay, you have digital bullying. Who gives a shit what little Jessica says? Like, I don't
Girls
care.
do.
Why?
That's because you're a boy. Because that's how they compete. We talked to Paula Wright about this.
Yeah.
Intra-gender competition with women is different than men. Stuff that we think is dumb means a lot to them. And stuff that means a lot to us, they think is dumb.
But see, that's not entirely true.
No.
It means a lot to you now, but 5 years from now,
It's
all
gonna be
about
different things.
First, two things. It's all about perspective, and you have to consider the source.
Right.
Those are the two things that matter.
So teach your kids to get off social media. Teach your kids to get outside, and teach them to that facts are information and not instruction.
That's fair.
All right,
All
back
right, so
to the
anyway,
podcast.
but that goes back. All this conversation goes with what Dan was saying, though.
Sure.
I mean, that's why I thought about that idea or thought about that question
Right.
while we were listening to him.
Sure.
Because anyway, I know we're getting to more social stuff, and you know what, Dan
But
did
that's
get
okay.
into. Dan did get into some social,
That's important.
socio-political issues today.
Right. I mean, how can you not?
Yeah.
History, that's all part of history. Why do we study it? Because it matters.
Well,
And so you hear a lot about history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. Dan says that all the time, right? And you can look at it like that, and that's true. But what I also think history does is because human nature is what you can learn from history.
yeah.
So you can learn, okay, in these types of situations, these things are possible. Okay, you're not going to be able to say, this one thing is what's going to happen. If people tell you that, they're usually full of shit. Okay, but what can tell you is, based on human nature, these few things are possible or likely.
Yeah, well, it goes back to, I mean, whatever. It goes back to other instances that Dan brought up today. Like, okay, in the next, things have been great in the U.S. for, I mean, yes, we've had some recessions, some economic downturns, but we haven't had a time where, and this goes to the Fourth Turning. So anybody that's read the Fourth Turning, if you haven't read the Fourth Turning, I highly recommend you read the Fourth Turning.
Fourth turning is here.
Yeah, the Fourth Turning is here, where the societies or the U.S. has gone through basically a sine wave of ups and downs, and I think maybe we're on the verge of a down cycle, which creates, once again, your hard men, because they have to be,
Right.
or a hard population or a tough population.
And Dan's point when we asked him about that was he's not sure that the technology hasn't broke that cycle.
I don't think it can.
I think it can.
I don't think it can.
It can. I don't
Because-
think it has. It might have. It might not have. But I think this technology is so revolutionary. It's just so game-changing. Like Dan brought this up tonight. How we are in the middle of switching from, well,
Analog to digital.
analog
We've
to digital.
already.
We've already switched, right? We had all of human history that was analog, and now it's human history that is digital, and what that does.
Sure.
And so that is the argument against Neil Howe it's called the technology argument, and it's other people have made that as well, and there's other books about that.
Technology cannot keep a society from an economic downturn.
No, it's not economic downturn that I'm talking about. It can stop the cycle.
It can't.
It could. It could just make it like this, or it could make it like this. It could. I'm not saying it has, but theoretically, technology could get good enough that it was just an up. Theoretically. Maybe. But human nature might negate that anyway.
Well, you still had the Spanish Inquisition and you had the printing press.
But you did not have global internet.
No.
As much as the printing press was amazing and game-changing and all of that, the internet is like that times a fucking million.
But you still had the telegraph. See, there's things.
No.
There's
but it's like a million times higher than that.
You
like
still had global communications.
Yeah, a telegraph. Now I can watch a video of the shit that happened in Ukraine the next hour.
Maybe.
Yeah, that's the problem, right?
Maybe.
Is it real or is it not?
Or is it from a past, a previous conflict?
Is it
that
really
they're
what it's saying
recycling?
it is?
Yeah. And that happens all the time.
Of course it does.
The
Of course
news
it does.
is miserable at that.
Yes.
Or they love they'll use footage from some other conflict in
Yes.
some other place at
Right.
some other time.
Sure.
To show you, well, this happened
And that's
yesterday.
part of learning this digital age, is learning what the hell can we trust? What can we trust?
Well, that's why field reporters are there. That's
yeah,
why
but how do you trust that they're not a biased source? How do you trust that they don't secretly work for the other side? How do you trust that the people from the UN aren't actually there and supporting Hamas or whatever?
Sure.
Like, there's no easy way to follow any of this anymore. So
Anyway.
that's part of surviving into the digital era, and maybe we can and maybe we can't.
Well, and so the reason why I don't think it can break the cycle is, right now, and not to deviate way too much, but you have the U.S. government that's $35 trillion in debt. You have the population of the U.S. that's $2 trillion in debit card debt alone.
You mean credit card debt?
Credit card debt, sorry. That's not including mortgages, anything else, student loans.
Right.
And sooner or later, it's unsustainable.
Right.
The amount that we spend as a country, the federal government down to the average population, the amount we spend for the money we don't have
Right.
is
So you're
insurmountable.
right. We might be completely in line for a downturn. But what you're saying is, or we might be in the middle of it, but what you're saying is, so that proves that the cycle's still in effect.
Correct.
But it doesn't. It just means we could be at the end of the cycle and now it just stays that way.
That's
we don't
possible.
know. We don't know.
It's unlikely.
It's unlikely.
It's unlikely.
Again, I think
that
it's unlikely.
We stay on a flat plane.
No, it might be not a flat plane. It might just be a flat down.
Steep down.
Or just a slow down.
Well, Dan brought this up too. Other countries are developing their own internet.
Right.
So then they don't have to have internet from other countries. So they don't even have to share.
Yeah, but as fast as they can do it, there's some freaking kid in their garage who's putting in some kind of hack to get access to the other stuff.
Sure.
It's too much. The cat is out of the bag. Like China censors all the hell out of their stuff, right? And
Yep.
Google searches. But there's
Some
people
stuff
there
still gets
figuring out.
Some stuff, or
Sure.
those people disappear.
But the difference is they jumped on it from the beginning. So you are going to have to be willing to crack down like 1984 style if you're going to get ahead of it now.
if you can.
That's what you would have to do.
Yeah.
All
And
right, but I think we got to wrap this up. I got to get this posted tonight still.
Okay.
So,
Well, anyway, thank you everybody for listening.
yep.
The Q&A and the Dan show was great. We recommend that everybody go. Or at
Yeah,
least
if
I
you get a
recommend.
chance to see Dan live, go. Just do it. It's worth it. You're going to like it. If you already like the podcast, it's like that, but better. That's what it is.
Yep.
And then he started the show with December 7th, 1941. I'm like,
Yep.
fuck, that's so good.
It was awesome.
It was so good.
A lot of people were happy to have him there. Everybody was happy.
Oh, it was great.
It was a great time.
It was great.
And it was, so it'd be like, going to see Dan Carlin with a bunch of buddies you didn't even know you had.
That's exactly what it is, right? Everybody there is excited for a history podcast talk. You
Yep.
gotta love it. That's what the internet gives you too, right? That wasn't possible before the internet.
Yep.
That's cool.
Well, like,
all right.
like pumping this out. This
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Thank you, and you have a nice
And
night.
thanks for tuning in. Look for a link in the description to Dan's old episodes, and also check out our sponsor, Ace Industrial Solutions. Thanks again for sending us out here, Ace.